Hi Hires, so problem solving question, data handling from the 2010 past paper, question 6. Okay, context. Remember, this is the first thing you need to do is to read this carefully and be absolutely certain you know exactly what the question is going to be talking about. So this one is talking about honeybees and specifically about waggle dances, which are quite cool, and if you fancy going and looking them up, then go ahead. You're told that you have bees fitted with radio tracking devices, which is quite tricky to do. I know someone who's actually done this. They're very, very small devices and they have to anaesthetize the bees first and everything, which is also quite cool. Go and look that up. So we have waggle dances performed when they returned and they were studied, and the time taken for each dance was recorded and the number of times it was performed within 15 seconds was counted. Okay, if you're not read it through carefully, pause it, read it. Here's your graph. So this is the usual thing for now for you guys, that you have a double axis graph. So on this axis here we have the average time taken for the dance, and it's this line that we're looking at reading to this axis, and then we also have the average number of waggle dances, and this is the solid line and is reading to this axis, and along the bottom we have the distance travelled from the food source to the hive. Okay. Right, so using values from the graph to describe the relationship between the distance travelled by a bee from the food source and the number of waggle dances performed in 15 seconds. So this is using values from the graph, and it's a describe question, and it's worth 2 marks. You've seen these now quite a few times. It is the same deal every time. You have to put in every point that would be descriptive of the graph. So we're looking for the relationship between the distance travelled, so your x-axis, and the number of waggle dances, so this axis here. So we're looking at the solid line, so points you'll need to describe. I'll need this point up the top, I'll need this point here, and I'll need this point here, and that's it. Okay, there's nothing else in that graph in terms of describing. So the reason it's tricky and the reason it's worth 2 marks is because you're reading to the secondary axis and not to the primary axis. So if this had been to the primary axis and it was the dotted line, I don't even think you would get 2 marks. You'd maybe get 1. Okay, because actually there's barely a kink in it, so that's pretty much going to be just a straight up. So you're going to have to put points in. So you're going to have your 500 meters traveled, and your point here is 6 dances in 15 seconds. Okay, and then we've got at 2,500 meters, you've got, where we're going, three dances in 15 seconds, and we're going at this point here, which is halfway after this one, so at 5,000. All right, just checking. 3,040, yeah, okay. So at 5,000 meters, we have 2 dances in 15 seconds. And I would probably put decreasing and decreasing to get your kind of proper description. Okay, all the points, nothing missing, must have units somewhere to actually give you the data. That's it. State the average time taken for a waggle dance when the distance travelled by a bee is 1,500 meters. Okay, so we've got, here's your data. The average time for a waggle dance when the distance is 1,500. So here's your 1,500. We're looking for time, so we're going to this one here. So you go up to here, and then you read it very, very carefully across. And where we're going, so that is 1.25 seconds. Being careful about your data points. Okay. Percentage increase. Yeah, so yet again, you guys are not getting percentages very often. You're getting percentage increase or percentage decrease. So in the time taken, so we're going to this one again. When the distance from the food source increases from 500 up here to 3,500. Okay, so we're looking for the dotted line, so we're starting here at 0.5 and we are going to here, which is midway between these two, so that's not too bad, so that's going to 3. Okay, so our percentage change is always change divided by start and then times by 100. So your change here is 2.5 divided by the start, which is 0.5, times it by 100. That is 500%. Okay. Okay, we're looking for the total time a bee would spend in the waggle dance in a 15-second period when the food source is 2,500 meters away from the hive. Okay, here's my 2,500 meters. Okay, we are looking, so we've got 2 data points here, this one and this one. Okay, so the solid line is telling me the number. So what that tells me, if they've been 2,500 meters away from the hive, then when they come back, they will do, on average, 3 dances. Okay, if they have been this far away, then looking at this one and reading this way, I know that each dance will last 2 seconds. So 3 dances for 2 seconds gives me 6 seconds in the dance. Okay, second investigation, so more data. In another investigation, the waggle dances of 6 bees from another hive were observed. Results are shown in the table below. Complete the table by calculating the average number of times the waggle dance was performed in 15 seconds. Now, to be honest, it's a little bit of a gift for a hire. So take all these, add them all up, and then divide by 6, because that's how many bees you have. And I did sit and calculate that one out, 2.5. It does say that you could write it down here, and it does say if you put units in here or units in here, they would ignore it. It's not good practice, but they would ignore it this time. Okay, so using information from the table and the graph, predict the distance that was travelled by B6 to its food source. So what we have about B6 is the number of times the waggle dance was performed. So number of times the waggle dance was performed is over here, and we're looking for 2.6. This is going up in 0.1s, which is quite nice. So there's my point. So read that across. There we go. And so distance. Could be worse, but you have to be careful that you read to the right place. So apart from distance from the hive, what other information about food sources would be useful to the bees? This is not in the data. This is entirely you coming up with your reason for this. Like, what else do you think they would need to know? So I think the obvious one is direction. It's all very well saying, 1,000 meters away there is an excellent source of food, but if you don't actually tell them which direction to fly in, that's no good to them. So direction would be my go-to, that's what I would say. Also on the mark scheme, they're quite happy if you said quantity and also quality of food source. Have a look at the mark scheme on this one, because there's several things that are acceptable, and there's also a few that are unacceptable answers. And the way that works in a markers meeting, the markers will have sat down, the marking group will have sat down, and they'll have written a kind of list of, these are the kind of answers that we might see coming up and we would not accept, and they go down into the not column. But then at the markers meeting, you go through every single question, and the markers say, would you accept this? Would you accept that? Would you accept? And they give all these answers. Now, you're not allowed to mark the papers before you go to the markers meeting, but you are allowed to look at them. So what you do is you look through some of the papers and you look for some of the questions that have come up and the answers that have been given, and that's what you ask when you go. So you'll notice sometimes some rather odd things. You're like, why on earth has that been put in? It's because at a markers meeting, one of the markers has said, what about if someone said, like in this case, someone has obviously asked, what about colour? Would that be a useful and acceptable answer for this one? And the answer was no, and they put it in the no column. Okay, so SQA Mark Scheme. On the mark scheme, make sure that you've just checked that you're happy with how you would get marked, or if you haven't, why you wouldn't. And as I say, if you're not sure of that last one as to whether you think what you've said is acceptable given this mark scheme, or why I've given you the mark or not, then just ask me. Okay, that's another one down.